To say the original 1933's King Kong was groundbreaking would be an understatement. In fact, the impact of the movie and its legacy is so well known that I think I can just not bother covering it at all and just skip straight ahead to the follow-ups. This movie has its origins in the juggle adventure and documentary genre of the early 1930s, the sort the character of Carl Denham is stated to make. Directors Marion Cooper and Ernest Schoedsack themselves were no strangers to this sort of flicks, having found acclaim in productions such as Chang and Grass. Their movies were pretty tame, however, when compared to others of the type, which rely heavily on sexual and racial exploitation, all to much success. You might actually remember them mentioning this kind of thing in the 2005 remake.
Will there be boobies? Boobies?
In my experience, people only go to these films to observe the undraped form of the native girls.
Given this success, it was a matter of time before a movie studio tried to capitalize on it by making something more palatable to general audiences' sensibilities while still being somewhat raunchy. The Hays Code was, after all, still a few months from being implemented, meaning Hollywood was the Wild West in regards to appropriate content, and King Kong is a reflex of that. There's an obscene amount of skin on display here, complete with Fay Wray having her dress slowly peel off by Kong, not to mention all the super gory ways in which people are disposed of, getting chilled, stomped and dropped in very graphical ways. Sure, nowadays we've all seen way worse on HBO, but back then it was as bad as it got, and it would remain so for some good 3 decades thanks to the moral guardians. Hell, even before the Watch Dogs started cracking on Hollywood, this movie was considered a little too much and they had to excise a scene where the crew of the Venture is attacked by giant insects if they wanted to release it at all. But you can thank Peter Jackson for restoring this absolute nightmare of a concept. I have a feeling all this talk about Hays codes and censorship is interesting to none except the buffets of movie buffs, so I'm gonna skip ahead and talk about the one thing everyone seems to remember this movie for, which is its innovative use of special effects. In context, it was not the first time anyone used stop-motion animation, composition, or rear projection in a movie, but it was pretty much the first time anyone used all of these techniques combined to give the movie a sense of scale unlike anything seen before. The creativity that went into the making of this flick is still baffling to witness. You will marvel at the technical prowess needed to pull off some of the most impressive scenes, like syncing multiple layers of projection in a pretty seamless way. It doesn't always work, of course. The animation work is pretty rough even for the time and denounces the absurdly tight deadline with which special effects technician Willis O'Brien had to work with. Another oddity that may be attributed to the time in which the film was made is its pacing. It takes a while for it to get going, with the Venture only arriving at the island around the 30-minute mark, in a 100-minute film, mind you. What makes this initial half-hour rather awkward is the off-putting lack of dialogue and music in some scenes, and what dialogue is there can be very expository, as if it was just filling in for some missing title card. That's because it basically was. This is a relatively early talkie, they were still figuring out how to write dialogue for film. So what little is here feels rather superfluous. Same for the sound effects. It was amazing to hear anything at all back then, and King Kong was one of the first films to explore the limits of cinematic soundscape. But nowadays, you will be hardly impressed with the titular characters spouting the same roar over and over again. The soundtrack was also quite innovational back when the use of a full orchestra was a novelty. That being said, the score has aged much better than other elements of the film, remaining a powerful piece of music from the early days of sound cinema and paving the way to bigger stuff down the road. And that's a pretty good way to sum this flick as a whole. Not that large, event-style movies didn't exist before, but King Kong is much more recognizable as a modern blockbuster, indulging in displays of cutting-edge technical wizardry that mesmerized a generation of people who would later become themselves masters of the medium, like Ray Harryhausen. Over time, the character would become a huge milestone in pop culture, the type which everyone knows, even if they have never seen the movies proper. Kong is probably rivaled only by James Bond in terms of sheer ubiquity and exposure, at least as far as film characters are concerned. The image of a giant ape climbing the skyscrapers of Manhattan is ingrained into the popular consciousness as well as into the city's own identity. You literally can't think of the Empire State Building without thinking of the movie. The two are almost symbiotic by this point. Speaking of which, from the ape's rampage through the streets of New York to his titanic brawls with the other denizens of Skull Island, all the images one traditionally associates with giant monster movies are here. It is not an exaggeration to say the entire genre owes its existence to this film. Hell, even Tomoyuki Tanaka admitted he decided to make giant monster movies after watching the film when it screened in Japan in 1952, which, in case you had any doubt, just cements it as the most important giant monster flick.
King Kong ain't got shit on me!
And this incredible legacy is thanks to the inherent strength of this original movie. Sure, it is pretty rough around the edges, which is understandable considering it comes from a time people were still figuring out how to operate a boom. Plot-wise, most characters can come off as complete assholes nowadays, and Kong himself isn't much more sympathetic. And that's not even getting into that other good 1930s stuff that definitely didn't age that well. But the foundation is solid, as proven by the fact all of its numerous remakes and reimaginings are mostly satisfied in only building on what is already here, improving on what needed to be improved while maintaining the spirit of the original masterpiece. All the remakes and reimaginings of King Kong will have to wait a while though, because first we will take a look at its much less known direct follow-up, Son of Kong.